Tonight, we are going to question the ground beneath our feet. We are going to question the warmth of the air, the stability of the horizon, and the very nature of the color blue. We live our lives clinging to a quiet assumption that Earth is a world of sunlight. We look at photographs taken from space, that famous blue marble suspended in the void, and feel a sense of familiarity. We see swirling white clouds over a vibrant, inviting ocean and think, this is home. We imagine the sea as clear and sunlit, a place where life unfolds in plain view. But that image, that beautiful, reassuring blue marble, is a lie. The world we think we know is not the rule. It is a rare, fleeting, and fragile exception. That beautiful blue color that defines our planet, nothing more than a trick of physics, a temporary optical illusion created by the way sunlight interacts with water molecules, a thin coat of paint on a skyscraper that has no lights. Peel back that top layer, just the tiniest fraction of the ocean's depth, and the blue vanishes instantly. The reality of Earth is not color, it is black, a suffocating, crushing, eternal darkness that has persisted for billions of years. 95% of the living space on this planet exists in a permanent night where the sun is nothing more than a myth. Why does the ocean deceive us so completely? The answer lies in the physics of light itself. Imagine you are standing on the deck of a boat in the middle of the Pacific. The sun is high overhead. The water looks clear, almost like liquid glass. Water, however, is not glass. It is a thief. When a beam of sunlight hits the surface of the ocean, it arrives as a full spectrum of energy. It carries every color of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The moment those photons penetrate the surface tension and enter the liquid, a violent theft begins. Water molecules are greedy. They aggressively absorb the energy of light, and they do it in a very specific order, starting with the low-energy wavelengths. The first victim is red. Red light is weak. It struggles to push through the density of the water. Within the first 5 meters of depth, barely the length of a family car, the color red is physically erased. It is absorbed by the water molecules and converted into heat. If you were to cut your hand at a depth of 10 meters, the blood seeping from the wound would not look red. It would look almost black, or perhaps a deep, muddy green, because there is no red light left in the universe down there to reflect off it. Descending deeper, passing the 20-meter mark, the theft continues. The orange wavelengths are stripped away, then the yellow. The water is acting like a brutal filter, narrowing the world down, stripping away the warmth of the spectrum. By the time we reach 30 or 40 meters deep, the only survivor is blue. Blue light has high energy. It has a short, punchy wavelength that allows it to dodge the water molecules and penetrate deeper than any other color. It scatters in every direction, bouncing back up toward the surface and into your eyes. Why the ocean looks blue? You are seeing the only survivor of the spectrum, the last remnant of sunlight that hasn't been eaten by the sea. Even the blue cannot last forever. Continuing our descent, leaving the surface world behind, the blue begins to fade. It shifts into a heavy twilight indigo. The sun above us, once a sharp, blinding disk, diffuses into a faint, sickly glow. We are entering the Snell's window, that strange optical phenomenon where the entire sky above is compressed into a circle of light that gets smaller and smaller the deeper we go. We are now hovering at the edge of the human world. Most of us will never go deeper than this. Scuba divers, free divers, even most military submarines operate within this thin sunlit skin of the ocean. We treat this layer as if it is the whole ocean. We map the coral reefs, we track the tuna, we watch the dolphins jumping in the waves, and we think we understand the sea. We have only scratched the surface. We are like astronauts who landed on the moon, looked at the dust around their boots, and claimed they had explored the entire galaxy. Below us, the water is getting colder. The pressure is building, pressing against the hull of our imagination. The indigo is turning into violet, and the violet is fading into grey. And just beneath this deceiving layer of light, the first true mystery of the deep is waiting. A phenomenon so vast, so dense and so alive that for decades it fooled the most advanced technology on Earth. The captains of the Second World War thought it was the sea floor. They thought it was solid rock. But it wasn't rock. It was meat. 200 meters down. The blue light of the surface has faded into a deep, melancholic twilight. In this dim borderland between the sun and the shadows, we encounter a mystery that once baffled the most powerful military in the world. The story begins in the early 1940s. The world was at war. The oceans were a battleground. American Navy destroyers were patrolling the Pacific, hunting for enemy submarines. They were using a relatively new technology called sonar, sending pulses of sound down into the depths and listening for the echo to bounce back. A simple principle. If the sound hits a submarine, it pings back. If it hits the ocean floor, it pings back. The operators began to notice something impossible. During the daylight hours, their instruments would show a solid floor at a depth of roughly 300 to 500 meters. The sonar waves would hit a dense mass and return a strong, clear echo, confirming that the bottom was relatively shallow. As the sun began to set, the impossible would happen. That floor would begin to move. It would rise toward the surface. It would detach itself from the depths and climb upward, sometimes reaching all the way to the surface waters. Then, as the sun rose the next morning, the floor would sink back down into the abyss, returning to its original position. It looked as if the crust of the Earth was breathing. It looked as if the planet itself was inhaling and exhaling in a 24-hour rhythm. For years, this phenomenon, labelled the phantom bottom, remained a classified puzzle. Charts were redrawn. Captains were confused. How could the depth of the ocean change by hundreds of meters every single night? When the answer finally came, it changed everything we thought we knew about the ocean. The sonar pulses weren't bouncing off rock or sand or mud. They were bouncing off swim bladders. The Navy had discovered the deep scattering layer. They had stumbled upon a living carpet composed of billions upon billions of small fish, shrimp, jellies and squids, packed so densely together that they formed a wall of flesh capable of reflecting sound waves. Not just a school of fish, the Deal vertical migration, the largest migration of animals on planet Earth. Forget the wildebeest crossing the Serengeti. Forget the caribou spanning the Arctic. In terms of pure biomass, nothing compares. Every single night, billions of tons of living creatures rise from the dark depths to feed at the surface, and every single morning they retreat back into the shadows. Leading this charge is a tiny, unassuming hero, the lanternfish. Hold one in your hand and it wouldn't look like a monster. Small, rarely growing larger than a human finger. The lanternfish, however, is the undisputed king of the deep. They are so numerous that scientists estimate they account for 65% of all deep-sea fish biomass. If you weighed every fish in the ocean, more than half of that weight would just be lanternfish. They spend their days hovering in the twilight gloom, deep enough to be invisible to the predators above, shallow enough to conserve energy. A state of suspended animation, waiting for the signal. And the signal is the sun. When the sun dips below the horizon, the trigger is pulled. The lanternfish, along with armies of copepods, krill and siphonophores, begin their ascent. They are chasing the plankton that lives near the surface. They are also running a gauntlet, a dangerous game of hide-and-seek played on a planetary scale. If they stay at the surface when the sun comes up, the visual predators, the tuna, the dolphins, the seabirds, will slaughter them. They are creatures of the dark, and the light is their enemy. So they must eat quickly under the cover of night and retreat before the first rays of dawn expose them. Imagine being in our submersible right now, hovering at 300 meters as this event begins. It would look like a blizzard in reverse, millions of tiny bioluminescent bodies rushing upward past the window. The water is thick with life, a chaotic, silent rush hour of biology. You are watching the planet's metabolic engine at work. These tiny creatures eat the carbon-rich food at the surface and then carry it down into the deep, locking that carbon away in the abyss when they excrete it. They are the reason the ocean can breathe. They are the reason the climate is stable. Tonight, we are not following them up to the feast. We are pushing through the crowd. We are driving the submersible down against the flow of traffic. Descending through this living cloud, the sonar pings begin to fade. The density of life thins out. We are leaving the false bottom behind. The water outside is changing again. The indigo is deepening into a heavy, suffocating violet. The temperature is plummeting. The true domain of the deep scattering layer, hides in the dark during the day, but the creatures we are about to meet live in the dark permanently. They do not migrate. They do not visit the surface. They wait. The mesopelagic zone, the twilight zone proper. Down here, the rules of engagement are different. In a world where the light is fading to nothing, the most valuable weapon you can possess is not sharp teeth or speed. It is an eye that can see the invisible, drifting past the 200-meter mark. The riotous, chaotic life of the false bottom is above us now, fading into the gloom. We are sinking into a world of quiet desperation. The mesopelagic zone, better known as the twilight zone. The water here is a pervasive, melancholic grey. Look out the window and you might think it is empty. A dangerous assumption. Not empty. Watching you. In this zone, the physics of survival undergoes a radical shift. Food is scarce, and the darkness provides few places to hide. The defining characteristic of this layer, however, is not the cold, nor the pressure, a singular, overwhelming obsession with sight. Down here, the sun is no longer a source of heat, a faint, dying signal from another world. The light that manages to penetrate this deep is incredibly weak, millions of times dimmer than daylight. In this environment, a single photon of light becomes a currency more valuable than gold. If you can catch that photon, if your eye is sensitive enough to register that tiny spark of energy, you can find a meal. If you miss it, you starve. Or worse, you become the meal. This evolutionary economic crisis has triggered an arms race of optics. The inhabitants of the twilight zone have warped their own biology to build the most sensitive visual instruments on the planet. Some have developed eyes that take up half their skulls. Others have evolved mirrored layers behind their retinas, a tapetum lucidum on steroids, to give light a second chance to be absorbed. One creature here has taken this paranoia to a level that defies logic. A fish that looks like a biological machine built by a feverish engineer. Drifting silently in the gloom, hovering like a surrealist painting, Macropinna microstoma, the barrel eye fish. At first glance, it looks impossible. Look at its face, and you would see a tiny pouting mouth and two small dark holes right above it. For decades, marine biologists assumed those dark holes were its eyes. They look like eyes. They are in the right place for eyes. They are not. They are olfactory organs, essentially nostrils, used to smell the chemical signature of the water. To find the real eyes, you have to look deeper. You have to look inside the fish. The entire top of the barrel eye's head is a transparent, fluid-filled shield, a biological cockpit canopy clear as high-grade quartz. And floating inside that fluid, protected by the skull, are two glowing green spheres. These are the eyes. They are tubular, shaped like barrels, hence the name. They function like high-powered telescopic lenses, and right now, as the fish hovers in the dark, those green barrels are pointing straight up. Imagine living your entire life looking through the top of your own skull. This fish spends its existence fixated on the sky above it, scanning the faint grey light filtering down from the surface, looking for shadows, waiting for the silhouette of a jellyfish, a shrimp, or a siphonophore to blot out the light. In the twilight zone, a silhouette is a betrayal, the only way prey reveals itself. For years, scientists believed the barrel-eye was cursed with a stiff neck, forever locked in an upward stare. It seemed like a fatal flaw. How do you eat what is in front of you if you can only look at the ceiling? In 2009, researchers at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute finally captured high-definition footage of a live specimen. They watched in amazement as the fish spotted prey. The green barrels inside the transparent dome didn't just stare, they rotated. As the fish maneuvered its body from a horizontal to a vertical position, the eyes swiveled forward, locking onto the target with robotic precision. The transparent shield isn't just a window, it is armor. The barrel-eye often steals food from the stinging tentacles of siphonophores. That clear dome protects its delicate, hypersensitive eyes from being stung and blinded while it picks pockets in the deep. The barrel-eye is not alone in its strange design. Drifting nearby, the telescope fish, Gigantura. It has abandoned the transparent shield strategy for something even more unsettling. Its eyes are tubular stalks that protrude from its head like a pair of binoculars. Normal fish have eyes on the sides of their heads, giving them a wide field of view to spot predators. The telescope fish doesn't care about what's beside it. Its eyes point forward, creating overlapping fields of vision. Binocular vision, depth perception in the pitch black. It allows the fish to judge the distance to its prey with mathematical accuracy before it strikes. These creatures are living testaments to the power of the twilight zone's pressure. Not just water pressure, but selective pressure. Evolution has ruthlessly pruned away anything that cannot see in the dark. A terrifying paradox emerges. If the predators have evolved telescopic eyes, green filters, and rotating lenses specifically to spot a shadow against the faint light above, how do you survive as prey? If having a silhouette is a death sentence, you cannot just hide behind a rock. There are no rocks. You cannot hide in the sand. The bottom is kilometers below. You are suspended in open water. To survive the eyes of the paranoia, you have to do something that seems physically impossible. You have to erase yourself. You have to become a ghost. 400 to 600 meters deep. In this monochromatic world of grey shadows and paranoia, survival is entirely dependent on solving a single brutal physics problem. How do you hide a solid object in a universe with no cover? In the open ocean, there are no rocks to scuttle behind, no coral reefs to blend into, and the seafloor is kilometers below. If a predator swimming beneath you looks up, your body naturally blocks the faint downwelling light from the surface. You become a black cutout against a grey sky, perfectly outlined for an attack. To survive here, you cannot just camouflage yourself. You have to fundamentally alter the way light interacts with your matter. You have to erase your own existence. The first and most elegant solution: become nothing. Drifting past our window, a creature that proves biology can master optical engineering, the cystosoma. A hyperrheiid amphipod, essentially a cousin of the tiny sand fleas you see on beaches, but down here it has grown to the size of a human hand. Yet, if you were swimming right next to it, you might never know it was there. The cystosoma is almost entirely transparent. Its skin, its muscles, and even its shell are clear as glass. Evolution has smoothed over the microscopic bumps on its surface to reduce light scattering, matching the refractive index of its body to that of the seawater. Light doesn't bounce off it. It passes straight through, rendering the animal practically invisible. Total transparency, however, is biologically impossible because of two organs that must remain opaque: the eyes and the stomach. A retina needs to absorb light to see, and a stomach is full of undigested food, which creates a dark, visible blob. The cystosoma solves this with a frantic geometric trick. It spends its life swimming in a strictly vertical position, standing upright in the water column. This posture minimizes its cross-section from below, turning its opaque stomach into a needle-thin line that is almost impossible to spot. A creature living on a razor's edge, constantly orienting itself to remain a ghost. Transparency is a luxury reserved for invertebrates. For fish, with their dense bones and hemoglobin-rich blood, becoming clear is not an option. So they choose a different path. If you cannot let the light pass through you, you must reflect it. Enter the marine hatchetfish, a marvel of compression. Its body is impossibly thin, laterally flattened like a silver coin or the blade of a heavy cleaver. Its flanks are coated in layers of guanine crystals, the same substance that makes fish scales shimmer, but here they are arranged into high-quality biological mirrors. In the diffuse, non-directional light of the twilight zone, these mirrors reflect the surrounding water. If a predator looks at a hatchetfish from the side, they don't see a fish. They see a reflection of the dark ocean behind it. The fish becomes a shard of the environment itself, a fragment of gloom hiding in the gloom. Yet mirrors have a fatal flaw. They work from the side, but they cast a shadow from below. To solve the silhouette problem, that deadly black outline against the surface light, the hatchetfish employs one of the most sophisticated biological technologies in nature: counter-illumination. Running along the bottom of the hatchetfish's belly is a ridge of specialized organs called photophores, biological LEDs capable of producing a soft blue-green light. They don't just glow randomly. The hatchetfish painstakingly adjusts the intensity of its belly lights to match the exact brightness of the sunlight filtering down from above. By producing its own light, it fills in the shadow it would otherwise cast. It replaces the light it blocked with light of its own creation, effectively erasing its silhouette from the perspective of a predator looking up. An active cloak of invisibility, a dynamic camouflage that adjusts in real time. If a cloud passes over the sun on the surface, dimming the light 500 meters down, the hatchetfish dims its belly lights to match. A game of perfect equilibrium. This magic trick comes at a steep price. Producing light requires energy. Maintaining a body that is constantly tuning its optical output, constantly swimming and constantly watching requires fuel and oxygen. And as we descend past the 600-meter mark, those resources begin to run out. The water outside is changing, a layer of the ocean where the planet seems to be holding its breath. The life here is not just hiding from predators, it is hiding from suffocation. Past the 600-meter mark, the frantic energy of the optical arms race begins to fade, replaced by a heavy, lethargic stillness. A layer of the ocean that acts as a biological barrier, a ghost town where the fundamental fuel of life is nearly exhausted. The oxygen minimum zone, OMZ. The bacteria feeding on the falling marine snow overhead have worked so efficiently that they have stripped the water of almost all its dissolved oxygen, creating a suffocating belt that wraps around the planet's oceans. High-energy predators like tuna, mako sharks or swordfish cannot enter this realm. If they dove this deep, their muscles would fail, and they would drown in the water column. Nature, however, abhors a vacuum, and even in this hypoxic wasteland, life has found a way to endure by slowing down time itself. drifting in this breathless void, a creature with a name that evokes Gothic horror, Vampiroteuthis infernalis, literally translating to the vampire squid from hell. When it was first hauled up by expeditions in the early 20th century, its appearance terrified biologists. It has a cloak of dark velvet red skin connecting its 8 arms, giving it the appearance of a vampire wrapping itself in a cape. Its eyes are enormous, icy blue orbs that seem to stare with a cold intelligence, and the undersides of its arms are lined with fleshy spines called cirri that look like rows of jagged teeth. Based on its name and anatomy, you would expect a blood-sucking predator that stalks the darkness, tearing apart live prey. The reality is a profound subversion of our expectations. The vampire squid is not a hunter, it is a gentle, lonely garbage collector. In the oxygen-starved environment of the OMZ, chasing prey requires too much energy, a luxury this animal cannot afford. Instead, it has evolved to be a detritivore. It does not use its webbed arms to strangle. It deploys 2 long, retractable filaments, thin, sensory threads that trail into the water like fishing lines. These filaments are coated in a sticky mucus designed to catch marine snow, the falling debris of dead plankton, fecal pellets, and crustacean shells drifting down from the surface. The vampire squid simply floats in the dark, waiting for the ocean's waste to stick to its lines, then retracts them to scrape off the sludge and eat it. A creature surviving on the scraps from the table of the sunlit world, living a life of passive endurance. To survive where others would suffocate, the vampire squid has rewritten its own internal chemistry. Unlike humans and most fish, who use iron-based hemoglobin to transport oxygen, which gives our blood its red color, the vampire squid uses hemocyanin, a copper-based protein that turns its blood blue. Hemocyanin is exceptionally efficient at binding to oxygen molecules in cold, low-oxygen environments, allowing the squid to extract the tiniest traces of air from the water. Combined with a metabolic rate that is among the lowest of all cephalopods, it exists in a state of suspended animation, a neutral gear where it burns almost no calories. The ultimate survivalist, thriving in a niche that no active predator can invade. Yet, even in the suffocation zone, safety is not guaranteed. If a rare predator does plunge briefly into the depths to attack, the vampire squid performs a defensive maneuver that is as bizarre as it is effective. It pulls its webbed arms completely over its head, turning itself inside out. This pineapple posture exposes the fleshy spines on the inside of its cloak, making it look spiky and unappetizing. If that fails, it doesn't shoot black ink. Ink is useless in the dark. Instead, it ejects a cloud of glowing, bioluminescent mucus containing countless glowing orbs of blue light. This dazzling fireworks display confuses the attacker, leaving them biting at phantom lights while the vampire quietly slips away into the blackness. Leaving this red-cloaked survivor behind, the environment begins to change once more. The oxygen levels slowly start to rise again as we tap into deep polar currents, but a new, more relentless enemy takes the stage, approaching the 1,000-meter boundary. The sheer weight of the water above us is becoming a physical tyranny. 1,000 meters. The faint residual gloom of the twilight zone has been extinguished completely, leaving us in a world of absolute, unyielding blackness. Darkness, however, is not the only force asserting itself. Descending deeper, the weight of the ocean above us transforms from a theoretical concept into a crushing physical tyranny, a realm where the water pressure exceeds 100 atmospheres. On the surface, we live at 1 atmosphere of pressure, a gentle embrace of air that we barely notice. Down here, every 10 meters adds another atmosphere of weight. By the time we reach the abyssal depths, The pressure will be equivalent to having a large African elephant balanced on a single postage stamp, and that stamp placed on your thumb. For a human, or indeed any air-breathing creature, this environment is instantly lethal. If you were to step outside the submersible now, the air in your lungs, sinuses, and inner ears would be compressed until it was solid. Your chest cavity would implode, ribs shattering under the strain. The violence of the deep ocean, however, goes far beyond crushing bones. It attacks the very building blocks of life itself. At the molecular level, biology relies on shape. Proteins, the complex machinery that powers your muscles, digests your food, and sends signals to your brain, must fold into precise, intricate 3D structures to function. Under normal conditions, water molecules gently support these structures. Under extreme hydrostatic pressure, water is forced into the tiny voids within these proteins, acting like a wedge. The pressure squeezes the proteins until they unravel, a process called denaturation. Essentially, the deep ocean tries to cook you without heat. It forces your enzymes to lose their shape and stop working, causing cellular machinery to grind to a halt. Cell membranes, which should be fluid and oily to allow nutrients to pass through, are compressed until they solidify into something resembling frozen butter. To survive in this crushing vice, deep-sea life has had to abandon the structural blueprints used by surface animals. The first casualty is air. Most surface fish possess a swim bladder, a gas-filled sac that helps them maintain buoyancy. Down here, a swim bladder is a bomb waiting to implode. Consequently, deep-sea creatures have eliminated air pockets entirely. They have replaced gas with fluids and gelatinous tissues that have the same density as the surrounding water. Since liquids are virtually incompressible, the pressure pushes through them rather than against them. Why so many deep-sea inhabitants, from the blobfish to the deep-sea jellyfish, look flabby, watery, and unstructured to our eyes? They are not poorly built. They are built of water to survive water. Structural changes are not enough to save the chemistry of the cells. To stop their proteins from being crushed, deep-sea animals have evolved a chemical shield. They saturate their cells with a molecule called trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMEO. Think of TMEO as a microscopic scaffold or a pillar. It binds to water molecules and prevents them from forcing their way into the proteins, holding the complex shapes together against the crushing weight outside. A fascinating, tangible side effect to this adaptation that you have likely experienced. TMAO is the chemical that gives rotting fish its distinctive fishy smell. The deeper an animal lives, the more TMAO it accumulates in its tissues to fight the pressure. The monsters of the abyss are not just terrifying to look at, they are chemically supercharged with the scent of the sea. This surrender to physics, the abandonment of hard bones, the loss of air, and the saturation of stabilizing chemicals, creates a specific aesthetic of the deep. The animals here are ghosts. They are soft, drifting, and often skeletal, stripping away every ounce of unnecessary mass to conserve energy in the high-pressure void. The bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone. The pressure is immense, the temperature is near freezing, and the darkness is total. Look closely out the window and you will see that the void is not empty. It is painted in a color that shouldn't exist here. 1,000 meters. The official start of the bathypelagic zone, poetically known as the midnight zone. Turn off the interior lights of our submersible now, and the darkness outside would be absolute. A suffocating, ink-like void where your eyes could remain open for 100 years and never register a single photon of sunlight. The sun is not just distant here, it is a rumor, a myth that has been completely extinguished by the kilometer of dense water above our heads. Logic suggests that in a world without light, color should be irrelevant. After all, why paint a house in the middle of the night? Yet, if we were to flip on our external floodlights, a shocking transformation would occur. The void is suddenly filled with the color of blood. Drifting past the thick quartz glass are creatures of intense, saturated scarlet. Deep-sea prawns with shells the color of a fire engine. Jellyfish like the atolla that wear skirts of deep crimson. Worms that look like neon ruby ribbons. It seems like a biological mistake. In the surface world, bright red is a high contrast signal. Think of a ladybug, a poison dart frog, or a stop sign. It screams to be seen. Why would animals desperate to hide in the dark paint themselves in the most visible color possible? The answer lies in the physics of the blue lie we discussed at the surface. Color is not an inherent property of an object. It is simply the result of light bouncing off a surface and hitting your eye. A red apple is only red because it absorbs every color of the rainbow except red, reflecting that specific wavelength back to you. For an object to reflect red light, however, there must be red light present in the environment to begin with. Remember the theft. Water absorbs long wavelength red light almost immediately, erasing it within the first few meters of the surface. Down here in the midnight zone, there is absolutely no red light. The only natural illumination comes from bioluminescence, the living light produced by other animals, and that light is almost exclusively blue or green, because those short wavelengths travel furthest in water, where the physics of camouflage becomes brilliant. When a predator scanning for food shines its biological blue flashlight onto a bright red shrimp, the red shell absorbs the blue light completely. It reflects nothing back. To the predator's eye, the shrimp isn't red. It isn't even grey. It is a void. It appears pitch black, merging perfectly with the surrounding water. In the deep ocean, being bright red is the mathematical equivalent of wearing a cloak of invisibility. Camouflage that relies not on blending in with a background pattern, but on exploiting the laws of optics to erase one's silhouette. In the eternal arms race of evolution, however, no defense is perfect. While the prey hides in the red spectrum, one predator has broken the rules of the game. Drifting silently in the gloom, the stoplight loose-jawed dragonfish, a nightmare of anatomy with a jaw that can snap open to 100 degrees and teeth that look like glass needles. Its true weapon, though, is located under its eye. Almost every creature in the deep ocean produces blue light. The dragonfish, however, possesses a rare and specialized photophore capable of emitting red bioluminescence. It sends out a beam of long wavelength red light into the darkness, a frequency that is invisible to almost every other animal in the abyss. The red prawns and jellyfish cannot see this light, so they do not react to it. They believe they are still safely hidden in the dark. The dragonfish can see it. It has evolved a unique retinal pigment, likely derived from consuming bacteria similar to chlorophyll, that allows it to perceive red light. This gives the dragonfish a private encrypted channel of vision. A sniper equipped with night vision goggles in a room full of blind targets. It swims through the darkness, shining its invisible red spotlight on its prey, spotting the black shapes of the red shrimp and striking before the victim even knows it has been lit up. The nature of the midnight zone. A silent war of physics, where the spectrum of light is weaponized and where invisibility is just a matter of wavelengths. Finding prey, however, is only the first problem. The second problem is catching it in an environment where calories are so rare that you cannot afford to chase them. Moving deeper, the red camouflage gives way to a darker strategy. Out of the absolute crushing blackness, a single point of light appears. Deeper into the midnight zone, passing the 1,500-meter mark, the frantic game of hide-and-seek we witnessed earlier begins to fade. That kind of active hunting requires energy, and energy is the one thing this environment cannot provide. Swimming fast burns calories. Chasing prey burns calories. In a world where a meal might only appear once a month, burning fuel without a guaranteed return is a death sentence. The strategy changes. We are leaving the hunters behind and entering the domain of the patient. A single point of light hovers in the void, bobbing gently in the current like a firefly suspended in a jar of ink. Faint, glowing with a soft, hypnotic blue-white pulse. In a world where eyes are desperate for photons, this light is irresistible. It promises something rare. To a passing crustacean or a small fish, it looks like a piece of marine snow, or perhaps a small glowing worm. It looks like food. Driven by instinct, the prey swims toward the glow. It gets closer. It investigates. And then the darkness behind the light splits open. In a fraction of a second, faster than the human eye can register, a massive pair of jaws engulfs the water, the light, and the prey. The trap snaps shut. Melanocetus johnsoni, the humpback anglerfish. The icon of the deep, a creature so nightmarish it has become the face of our fear of the ocean. Its body is a globular, black sphere, designed not for speed but for floating, essentially a mouth with a stomach attached. The most sophisticated piece of engineering on this animal, however, is not its teeth, but the fishing rod growing out of its forehead. This appendage is called the ilitium, and the glowing bulb at the tip is the esker, the strange biological truth that makes this creature truly fascinating. The anglerfish cannot make its own light. Take a scalpel and dissect that glowing bulb, and you would not find battery cells or electricity. You would find a thriving colony of living things. The esker is hollow, and inside it live millions of bioluminescent bacteria, most likely from the genus Vibrio. One of the most elegant examples of symbiosis on the planet. The relationship is transactional. The anglerfish provides the bacteria with a safe home and a constant supply of nutrients drawn from its own blood. In return, the bacteria provide the light. They are permanent tenants, paying their rent in photons. The chemistry of this light is even more remarkable. Inside each of those tiny bacterial cells, a reaction is taking place that puts our best light bulbs to shame. The bacteria possess a molecule called luciferin, named after Lucifer, the light bringer. When luciferin reacts with oxygen, aided by an enzyme called luciferase, it releases energy in the form of cold light. Unlike a filament bulb, which wastes 90% of its energy as heat, this bioluminescence is nearly 100% efficient. Light without heat, the perfect illumination for a cold, dark world. The mystery, however, is where these bacteria come from. Baby anglerfish are not born glowing, they are born dark. For years, scientists were puzzled. Do the mothers pass the bacteria to their offspring? The answer appears to be no. The young anglerfish must develop a special pore in their developing light organ and then catch the specific bacteria from the open water. A moment of infection that becomes a partnership. Once the right bacteria enter the bulb, the door closes, and the fish is ready to hunt. And the hunt is a masterclass in physics. The anglerfish does not bite in the traditional sense. It relies on suction. When it detects prey touching its lure, it expands its buccal cavity, mouth space, explosively. This creates a massive vacuum pressure. The water rushes into the mouth, dragging the hapless victim along with it. Once inside, there is no escape. The teeth of the anglerfish are translucent, needle-sharp and recurved, pointing backward toward the throat. Their genius, though, lies in their hinges. They are flexible. If prey tries to swim in, the teeth fold down flat to let it pass. If the prey tries to back out, the teeth snap up and lock into a rigid vertical position, acting like the bars of a prison cell. The biological equivalent of a lobster trap. Easy to enter, impossible to leave. This entire mechanism, the bacterial light, the vacuum mouth, the hinged teeth, is designed for one purpose: laziness. The anglerfish is the ultimate energy miser. It hangs motionless in the water, sometimes for days or weeks, waiting for a single mistake. Life in the midnight zone, however, presents an even greater challenge than finding food. The ocean is vast, dark, and three-dimensional. The population density is incredibly low. You might swim for a lifetime and never meet another member of your own species. So, if you are a female anglerfish drifting in the dark and you finally encounter a male, the stakes are infinite. You cannot afford to let him go. You cannot risk a courtship dance. You cannot risk losing him in the shadows. To solve this problem, the anglerfish has evolved a reproductive strategy so horrific that when scientists first discovered it, they refused to believe it was real. They didn't find two fish mating. They found a creature that had dissolved its own face for love. 2,000 meters. The loneliness of the midnight zone is palpable here. The water is vast, black, and seemingly empty. In this desolate expanse, the chances of two solitary creatures meeting are infinitesimally small. For a species to survive here, finding a mate isn't just a challenge, it is a statistical miracle. And miracles in the deep ocean are too unreliable to count on. Evolution has devised a solution so radical, so physically intrusive, that it challenges our very definition of what it means to be an individual. When early marine biologists in the 1920s first began examining specimens of anglerfish brought up in trawler nets, they noticed something puzzling. Every single large, terrifying fish with a lure was female. They measured in at 1/2 meter or more, equipped with those massive jaws and glowing baits. The males, however, were nowhere to be found. They searched the nets for lookalikes, for male counterparts, but found none. What they did find were curious parasites attached to the bellies of the females. These looked like tiny vestigial fish, often just a few centimeters long, biting onto the skin of the larger host. For years, scientists assumed these were babies, or perhaps a different species entirely, feeding on the mother. They were wrong. Those tiny, withered attachments were the males. The life of a male anglerfish is a tragedy written in biological code. He is born into the world as a dwarf, a fraction of the size of his mate. He possesses no lure. He has no large teeth. He has a stunted digestive system that makes long-term survival impossible. He is born with a ticking clock, a limited reserve of energy provided by his liver. His sole purpose, his entire reason for existing, is to find a female before he starves to death. To aid him in this desperate quest, he is equipped with one superpower: a nose. The male anglerfish has colossal olfactory organs, nostrils that take up a huge portion of his head. He is essentially a swimming nose. He sniffs the currents, searching for the specific pheromones released by a female. He follows this chemical trail through the crushing dark, mile after mile, driven by a singular biological imperative. When he finally finds her, there is no courtship. There is no dance. There is no gentle nuzzling. He swims straight to her flank and bites her, and he never lets go. What happens next, the horror or the beauty, depending on your perspective, begins after the bite. The male releases a specialized enzyme that acts like a chemical acid. It begins to dissolve the skin of his own mouth and the skin of the female's belly. The tissues melt, weep, and then fuse together. Not just latching on, a breakdown of physical boundaries. The fusion goes deeper than the skin. Eventually, the male's blood vessels merge with the female's. Her heart begins to pump blood into his body. His waste products flow into her system to be filtered. They become a single organism with two bodies. Once this connection is established, the male undergoes a terrifying metamorphosis. Because he no longer needs to hunt, his eyes wither and fall off. His fins atrophy. His internal organs, aside from the essentials, dissolve. He is reduced to nothing more than a living pair of testicles, fed by the female's blood, existing solely to provide sperm whenever she is ready to spawn. sexual parasitism. It solves the problem of the deep. Since finding a mate is so difficult, this strategy guarantees that once you find one, you never, ever lose them. Till death do us part is not a vow down here, it is a physiological fact. A female anglerfish carries her mate with her forever, a portable supply of genetic material. Some females have been found with up to 8 males fused to their bodies, 8 lives absorbed into one. This process raises a massive medical question that puzzled scientists for decades. Why doesn't the female's immune system attack the male? In any other animal, if you grafted a piece of foreign tissue onto another body, the immune system would identify it as an invader and reject it violently. This is why organ transplants in humans require powerful drugs. Yet the female anglerfish accepts this foreign body, feeds it, and integrates it. Recent research in 2020 revealed that these fish have essentially deleted the parts of their immune system that recognize self versus non-self. They have sacrificed their body's defense mechanisms, specifically the MHC class genes and T-cell receptors, to allow this fusion to happen. They have made themselves immunologically vulnerable just to ensure the survival of the species, a biological gamble of the highest order. The intimacy of the abyss. Grotesque, yes. The loss of self, the dissolving of the face, the reduction of a living being to a mere appendage. It is also the ultimate commitment. In the cold, crushing dark, alone is death. Together, no matter the cost, is life. While the anglerfish solves the problem of scarcity by fusing with its mate, other creatures must solve the problem of hunger in solitude. What happens if you are alone and the only food that swims by is larger than you are? You cannot fuse with it. You have to swallow it. Past the 2,500 meter mark, the water pressure is now 250 atmospheres, enough to crush a tank like a soda can. The most pressing threat here, however, is not the weight of the water, it is the emptiness of it. Deep in the bathypelagic zone, a place so removed from the productive surface that it is essentially a biological desert. In this vast, nutrient-poor wasteland, a meal might drift by once a week, once a month, or perhaps once a year. In such an unforgiving economy, there is a golden rule that dictates the shape of every predator. Beggars cannot be choosers. If you are a predator drifting in the dark and you finally encounter another living thing, a squid, a fish, a shrimp, you cannot afford to stop and measure it. You cannot ask if it fits in your mouth. You cannot worry about whether your stomach is big enough to hold it. You have to eat it. No matter the size, no matter the shape, you must consume it, because you do not know when or if you will ever eat again. This brutal evolutionary pressure has sculpted the most disproportionate animal on Earth, Eurypharynx pelicanoides, the gulper eel, often called the pelican eel. See one swimming casually in the dark with its mouth closed, and you might mistake it for a black ribbon. Mostly tail, a long, slender, whip-like filament trailing behind a modest head. It looks frail. It looks skeletal. It possesses tiny eyes, barely any pectoral fins, and very little muscle mass. It looks like a creature that a gust of current could snap in half. This fragility, however, is a calculated trade-off. The gulper eel has sacrificed everything, speed, strength, vision, and armor, to invest all its evolutionary points into a single attribute: volume. When it detects prey, the gulper eel undergoes a transformation that resembles a special effect from a body horror film. Its jaw is not attached to its skull in the way yours or mine is. It is loosely hinged, connected by elastic ligaments that allow it to swing freely. When the eel opens its mouth, the jaw unspools. It expands outward and downward, creating a cavernous, terrifying opening that is often wider than the eel's entire body length. Think of an umbrella suddenly opening in a violent windstorm. That is the gulper eel's face. The skin of its throat is distinctively pleated and elastic, designed to stretch like a high-altitude weather balloon. This allows the gulper eel to engulf a volume of water and prey that is massive. It does not bite its victims. It swallows the space they occupy. It swims over them like a living net. Once the prey is trapped inside that massive buccal cavern, the eel pumps the excess water out through its gills and swallows the catch whole. Because its stomach is just as stretchy as its mouth, and because it lacks ribs that would constrict expansion, it can consume animals larger than itself. Imagine a python swallowing a deer, but happening in seconds, suspended in zero gravity. This ability allows the gulper to target anything it finds. It effectively removes the concept of too big to eat from its vocabulary. How does such a slow, weak swimmer catch anything in the first place? It cannot chase down a fast-moving squid. The answer lies at the very tip of that long, whip-like tail. Look closely at the end of the tail and you will find a tiny pink photophore. It glows in the dark. Scientists believe the eel uses this pink light as a sophisticated lure. In the pitch black, the eel likely positions its tail near its mouth, waving the glowing tip gently. To a curious crustacean or a predator looking for a small meal, that pink light looks like prey. They swim toward it, only to realize too late that the darkness behind the light is not empty water. It is a throat waiting to expand. The gulper eel is a triumph of minimalism, a biological gamble that says, I will be weak, I will be slow, and I will be blind, but I will never, ever let a meal escape. The embodiment of the starvation strategy. Not all creatures in the deep face the darkness alone, however. While the gulper eel and the anglerfish are solitary hunters relying on stealth and patience, there is another form of life down here that has chosen a different path. They do not hunt as individuals. They hunt as a collective. Approaching the 3,000-meter mark, our lights catch something that looks like a tangled line of fishing net, stretching for nearly 40 meters through the gloom. It isn't a net. A single living entity made of thousands of smaller bodies. 3,000 meters, the solitude of the gulper eel and the lonely vigil of the anglerfish have painted a picture of the deep ocean as a place of isolation. We imagine the abyss as a realm of hermits, where every creature is an island fighting for itself. Our lights cut through the eternal blackness and encounter a shape that defies this rule. At first, it looks like a mistake. Stretching across the view of the porthole, a long, thin, white line. It looks like a piece of tangled fishing line, or perhaps a rope of mucus extending endlessly into the dark. We follow it with the submersible. It goes on for 10 meters, 20 meters, 40 meters, longer than a blue whale, longer than the submersible itself. It dominates the water column like a silent, suspended highway. Not a piece of trash, a giant siphonophore, prior dubia. And a detail that breaks the human mind. You are not looking at a single animal, you are looking at a city. The siphonophore challenges the very definition of what it means to be an individual. In our world, an animal is a single, discrete unit. You have a heart, a stomach, and legs, and they are all parts of you. The siphonophore operates on a different logic, a colonial superorganism. That 40-meter-long rope is composed of thousands of tiny individual bodies called zooids. These zooids are genetically identical. They are clones of the original embryo, but they have morphed into radically different shapes to perform specific jobs. They have specialized so deeply that they can no longer survive on their own. At the very front of the colony, the nectophores, the pilots. They look like pulsating, transparent bells. Their only job is to pump water, dragging the massive colony through the ocean. They have no mouths. They cannot eat. They are simply living engines. Behind them trail the gastrozooids, the stomachs. They have mouths, but they cannot swim. Their only job is to liquefy prey and absorb nutrients, which they then pump through a shared stem to feed the rest of the colony. And guarding them all, the dactylozoids, the soldiers. They are long, thin tentacles armed with millions of toxic stinging cells, called nematocysts. They form a curtain of death that hangs down into the water, snagging any shrimp or fish foolish enough to swim into the colony. Imagine if your hand was a separate animal, your stomach was another animal, and your legs were a third animal, all holding on to each other, sharing a single bloodstream and working in perfect synchronization. That is a siphonophore, a biological hive mind, a creature that has erased the line between one and many. In the motionless water of the midnight zone, this strategy is devastatingly effective. A single Praia dubia can deploy a net of tentacles that covers hundreds of square meters. It doesn't need to hunt. It simply occupies space. It transforms a vast volume of empty water into a minefield. When prey hits this net, the darkness suddenly ignites. Most siphonophores are bioluminescent. When disturbed, they don't just glow, they pulse. Waves of blue light ripple down the length of the colony like a falling line of dominoes. Some species produce bright red light at the tips of their tentacles to act as lures, similar to the anglerfish, while others release glowing particles into the water to distract predators. A silent fireworks display in a theatre with no audience. Seeing a siphonophore in the deep is a reminder that life does not always follow the blueprint of the vertebrate body. We are obsessed with heads, brains, and centralization. The ocean often prefers decentralization. It prefers the network. While these silent floating cities dominate the visual landscape of the deep, there is another layer of the ocean that is defined not by what you can see, but by what you can hear. The ocean is dark, yes, it is not quiet. We tend to think of the deep ocean as a silent grave. Without the crashing of waves, the crying of seagulls, or the hum of boat engines, we imagine the abyss as a place of perfect, heavy quiet. A misconception born of our own limited senses. Turn off the submersible's thrusters and listen, really listen, with the right instruments, and you would realize that the ocean is not silent at all. It is a cacophony, roaring, clicking, whistling, and groaning. And at a specific depth, usually around 1,000 meters depending on latitude, the ocean transforms into a planetary telephone line that defies the laws of acoustics as we understand them in the air. The SOFAR channel, sound fixing and ranging. The speed of sound in the ocean is controlled by two opposing forces, temperature and pressure. Near the surface, the water is warm, so sound travels fast. Descend deeper, the water gets colder and sound slows down. Even deeper, the crushing pressure takes over, making the water denser and causing sound to speed up again. Sandwiched between these two high-speed zones, a sweet spot, a channel of minimum sound speed. When a sound wave enters this channel, it gets trapped. If the wave tries to bend up toward the warmer surface, the speed change refracts it back down. If it tries to bend down toward the high-pressure deep, it is refracted back up. The sound is focused into a narrow beam, bouncing back and forth like light inside a fiber optic cable. In this channel, a low-frequency noise doesn't dissipate after a few miles. It travels. It can cross entire ocean basins. A blue whale singing off the coast of Ireland can effectively be heard by another whale in the Caribbean, thousands of kilometers away. The Internet of the Cetaceans, a global communication network that existed millions of years before humanity laid its first telegraph cable. Sometimes the SOFAR channel carries sounds that do not belong to whales. In the summer of 1997, hydrophones operated by NOAA picked up a signal that stopped analysts in their tracks. It originated from a remote point in the South Pacific, west of the southern tip of South America. The sound was ultra-low frequency, powerful and organic in nature. It rose quickly in frequency over about 1 minute and was loud enough to be detected by sensors more than 5,000 kilometers apart. They called it the bloop. For years, the imagination of the public and the scientific community ran wild. The audio profile of the bloop bore a striking resemblance to that of a living creature, specifically the voice of a marine animal. The volume, however, was impossible, several times louder than the call of a blue whale, the loudest known animal on Earth. If this was a creature, it would have to be gargantuan, a leviathan far larger than anything currently known to science. It fueled theories of undiscovered sea monsters or prehistoric survivors hiding in the deep. The truth turned out to be far more majestic than a monster. Years of analysis and subsequent recordings revealed that the bloop was indeed the sound of a giant but a geological one. The sound of an icequake, large icebergs carving off the Antarctic glaciers and cracking as they melted in the warmer ocean waters create massive, low-frequency tremors that mimic biological sounds. The ocean was literally groaning under the weight of shifting ice. While it wasn't Cthulhu, it was a stark reminder of the scale of forces at play in the deep. The geology of the planet is so loud it can be heard across hemispheres. Yet, there is one sound in the channel that remains a genuine biological mystery, and it is far more heartbreaking than an icequake. Since the late 1980s, sonar systems have tracked a single solitary voice in the North Pacific. The call of a whale, but unlike any other. Blue whales vocalize at a frequency of 10 to 39 Hz. Fin whales operate at 20 Hz. This individual sings at a much higher pitch, 52 Hz. This frequency mismatch has earned it the nickname the loneliest whale in the world. Because its call is at such a unique frequency, scientists speculate that other whales may not be able to hear it, or if they do not recognize it as one of their own. It swims alone, migrating up and down the Pacific coast, calling out into the SOFAR channel year after year, but never receiving an answer. Its path does not align with the known migration routes of other species. A ghost in the machine, a unique acoustic signature drifting through the dark, singing a song that only our machines are listening to. Leaving the acoustic highway of the SOFAR channel, we continue our descent. The sound of the lonely whale fades into the static, pushing deeper now past the acoustic layers toward the physical bottom. Descending toward the seabed of the Gulf of Mexico, roughly 1,000 meters down, our sonar picks up a flat, reflective surface ahead. Visually, it makes no sense. We are already underwater. We are immersed in the ocean. Yet looking out the porthole, we see what appears to be a sandy beach surrounding a distinct body of water, a lake sitting on the bottom of the sea. It has a shoreline. It has a shimmering surface. It even has tiny waves rippling across it. Not a mirage, and certainly not a place you would ever want to swim. A brine pool, specifically a formation so lethal that the scientists who discovered it in 2015 named it the Jacuzzi of Despair. The existence of a lake inside the ocean seems to violate the laws of physics, but it is actually a demonstration of density. The water inside this pool is not normal seawater. Super-concentrated brine, dissolving from ancient salt deposits buried beneath the seafloor since the Jurassic period. Leftovers from a time when the ocean dried up and left massive salt flats behind. This brine is 4 to 5 times saltier than the surrounding ocean, making it incredibly dense and heavy. Because of this extreme density, it does not mix with the seawater above it. Instead, it sinks, settling into depressions in the seabed and forming a distinct separated layer. It sits there like oil in vinegar, refusing to merge, creating a sharp, visible barrier known as the halocline. Visually, the Jacuzzi of Despair is hauntingly beautiful. The edges of the pool are lined with a rim of mussels, clustering like tourists on a beach. and the water itself shimmers with an iridescent quality due to the refractive difference between the brine and the ocean. This beauty, however, is a trap. The pool is a cauldron of toxic chemicals, rich in methane and hydrogen sulfide, and completely devoid of oxygen. A warm, salty bath of poison. The horror of the jacuzzi reveals itself when you look closely at the lake bed, a graveyard. Scattered across the bottom of the pool are the bodies of dozens of large crabs and amphipods. These creatures, likely scavenging for food, wandered too close to the edge. Perhaps they slipped, or perhaps they were enticed by the smell of the methane. The moment they crossed the shoreline and fell into the brine, their fate was sealed. The shock of the hypersaline water would have caused massive osmotic stress, likely inducing seizures or paralysis within minutes. They suffocated and died right there, perfectly preserved in the toxic soup. The most disturbing detail: the crabs don't rot. In the normal ocean, a dead crab would be consumed by scavengers or decomposed by bacteria within days. The jacuzzi of despair is so toxic and so salty that not even bacteria can survive inside it. It pickles its victims. The crabs lying there could have died yesterday, or they could have died 10 years ago. They are pristine mummies, preserved in a state of eternal death, trapped in a museum display that no one was ever meant to see. Yet, life always finds a way to cling to the edge of death. The ring of mussels living on the shoreline survives because of a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that can process the methane gas seeping from the pool. They live precariously on the rim, utilizing the poison as fuel, but never entering the pool itself. A stark reminder of the ocean's duality, a place where life pushes to the absolute limit, right next to a zone of instant sterilization. Lifting off from this underwater graveyard, leaving the preserved crabs in their silent, salty tomb, the landscape begins to change. The dramatic geology of the continental shelf and the salt domes fades away. The seabed flattens out. The rocky outcrops disappear, drifting deeper past the 4,000-meter mark into the largest and most monotonous habitat on Earth. 4,000 meters. The abyssopelagic zone. The term is derived from the Greek word abyssos, meaning bottomless, and for centuries, sailors and early cartographers believed this region was a void of infinite depth. While we now know it has a physical bottom, the scale of it is difficult to comprehend. Drifting over the abyssal plains, vast flat expanses of sediment that cover nearly 50% of the Earth's surface. The largest habitat on our planet, yet it remains less mapped than the surface of Mars. Look out the window now, and you would see a landscape that resembles a desolate lunar prairie. Endless, flat and monochromatic, covered in a thick layer of ooze, a scientific term for the soft grey mud composed of the microscopic skeletons of diatoms, radiolarians and foraminifera that have been raining down from the surface for millions of years. This sediment is the dust of history. If you were to stick your hand into it, you would be touching the remains of creatures that lived when woolly mammoths walked the earth. A world of crushing silence, perpetual darkness, and near-freezing temperatures. In such a featureless wasteland, where there are no rocks to hide behind and food is swept along unpredictable currents, swimming is an inefficient use of energy. If you want to survive here, you don't chase your food. You become a statue. Standing silently on the soft mud, one of the most bizarre adaptations in the vertebrate kingdom, Bathypteroa grallata, the tripod fish. At first glance, it doesn't look like a fish at all. It looks like a piece of abandoned industrial equipment or a three-legged camera stand. The tripod fish has taken the standard anatomy of a fish and stretched it to absurd proportions. Its pelvic fins and its caudal tail fin have elongated into rigid, bony rays that can grow to be more than a meter long. By locking these rays in place, the fish creates a stable tripod structure, allowing it to stand on the seafloor, hovering its body distinctively above the mud. This posture is a masterstroke of engineering. By elevating itself, the tripod fish lifts its head into the boundary layer of the current, just high enough to catch the small crustaceans and zooplankton drifting by, low enough to remain stable. It faces into the current, turning its mouth into a passive intake valve. Its modifications go further. Its pectoral fins, the ones usually on the side for steering, have evolved into long fan-like antennae. It holds these fins forward, sensing the water like a blind man using a cane, feeling for the microscopic impacts of drifting prey in the pitch black. When a shrimp bumps into these sensory fans, the fish snaps it up. It doesn't hunt. It waits for the ocean to feed it. The abyssal plains, however, present a problem even greater than hunger: loneliness. The population density down here is pitifully low. You could stand on your tripod for 10 years and never see another member of your own species. If you are a male tripod fish and the only other fish you meet in a decade is also a male, your genetic line ends there. Evolution, ruthless as always, has solved this by removing the variable of gender entirely. The tripod fish is a simultaneous hermaphrodite. Every single individual possesses both fully functional male and female reproductive organs. This eliminates the risk of meeting the wrong sex. If two tripod fish meet in the dark, they can mate instantly, with both individuals fertilizing each other and both laying eggs. It doubles the reproductive output of the encounter. The adaptation goes even darker. If a tripod fish lives its entire life without ever meeting another soul, it has a failsafe. It can reproduce with itself. It can release its own sperm to fertilize its own eggs, spawning a generation of clones just to ensure the species does not vanish from the abyss. A solitary, stationary existence, engineered for a world where movement is costly and company is a myth. The tripod fish is a sentinel of the mud, a creature that has conquered the void by simply refusing to move. Drifting over these endless plains, the sediment begins to change. The pressure continues to mount, moving toward a creature that has surrendered to the physics of the deep in a completely different way. The tripod fish grew stilts to stay above the mud. The next creature we meet has dissolved its own bones to become one with the water. The rigid, stilt-walking adaptations of the tripod fish, a creature that fights the current by turning itself into architecture. Drifting through the deep ocean, exploring the different strategies life employs to survive the crush, we must confront a creature that has taken the exact opposite approach. Instead of fighting the pressure with bone and spines, this animal has chosen to surrender to it completely. A creature that you likely know better as a punchline than as a living being, a viral sensation that became the face of ugliness itself. Cycrolutes marcidus, the blobfish. You have undoubtedly seen the photograph. It shows a gelatinous pink pile of sludge sitting on a plastic tray. It possesses a bulbous, drooping nose, a wide, frowning mouth, and watery eyes that seem to stare into the middle distance with an expression of profound existential misery. In 2013, the Ugly Animal Preservation Society held a public vote, and the blobfish won by a landslide, officially crowned the world's ugliest animal. Since then, it has become a meme, a plush toy, and a symbol of everything gross and unappealing about the deep sea. We owe the blobfish an apology. The image we mock, the face we laugh at, is not a portrait of a living animal in its natural habitat, a crime scene photo, the image of a corpse that has suffered a catastrophic physical trauma. Most surface fish maintain their position in the water column using a swim bladder, an internal gas-filled sac that acts like a balloon. By inflating or deflating it, they can rise or sink. At the depths where the blobfish lives, typically between 600 and 1,200 meters, Though its relatives go deeper, a gas-filled bladder is a liability. The external pressure is roughly 120 times greater than at the surface. To keep a swim bladder inflated against that kind of force without it collapsing would require massive muscular effort and energy, luxuries that do not exist in the deep. So, the blobfish evolutionarily abandoned the swim bladder entirely. Instead, it adapted by altering the very composition of its flesh. Its body is made of a gelatinous substance with a density slightly less than that of water. Essentially, a living buoyancy aid, a floating mass of jelly that hovers effortlessly above the seafloor. It has very little muscle, no distinct skeleton to speak of, and soft, pliable cartilage. In its natural environment, surrounded by the crushing hug of the ocean which holds its body together, the blobfish actually looks like a fish. It has a structural shape, a tapered tail, and a broad, slightly grumpy head. Not a beauty queen, certainly, but a functional, streamlined organism perfectly adapted to its high-pressure home. The tragedy occurs when a research vessel or a deep-sea trawler drags a net across the bottom. When a blobfish is caught and hauled up to the surface, it experiences a depressurization event that is violent and fatal. As the net rises, the pressure drops rapidly from 120 atmospheres to 1. The gases dissolved in its gelatinous tissues expand explosively. Its cell membranes rupture. Its structural integrity, which relied on the external pressure of the ocean to hold it in shape, completely fails. By the time it is dumped onto the deck of the boat, it has literally melted. It collapses into a puddle of its own ruined tissue, its features distorting into that famous drooping frown. Laughing at the blobfish for looking ugly on the surface is equivalent to throwing a human being into the vacuum of space without a suit and then mocking them for exploding. A creature taken out of context. Down in the cold dark, it is a masterpiece of efficiency, floating without effort, waiting for a crab or a sea pen to wander into its mouth. It reminds us that beauty in biology is relative to the environment. What looks like a monster to us is simply a survivor that we have dragged into a world it was never meant to see. Leaving the tragic story of the blobfish behind and continuing our descent toward the 6,000-meter mark, we encounter a creature whose disturbing appearance cannot be explained away by decompression or trauma. Something drifting in the black water below us that defies easy classification. It does not look like a fish. It does not look like a squid. It looks like a stick figure drawn by a frightened child. Past the 5,000-meter mark, leaving the domain of the misunderstood blobfish and the stationary tripod fish behind, entering a depth that pushes the limits of biological plausibility, a realm where the darkness seems to possess a heavy, watchful quality. In the history of deep-sea exploration, many discoveries were made by dedicated scientific expeditions, but some of the most unsettling encounters happened by accident. In the early 2000s, as oil and gas companies pushed their drilling operations into deeper and deeper waters, they sent remote-controlled vehicles, ROVs, down to inspect their wellheads. These robots, equipped with harsh floodlights and grainy cameras, were looking for leaks or structural damage. Instead, on November 11, 2007, near a Shell oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico, they found a ghost. The footage captured that day is grainy, greenish, and eerily silent. Yet, it has become one of the most famous pieces of deep-sea video in existence. As the ROV pans across the black water, it reveals a creature that instantly triggers a deep, primal dissonance in the human brain. A squid, but it looks nothing like the muscular, jet-propelled hunters we know from the surface. Magna pinna, the big fin squid. Its body is small and pale, topped with massive, flapping fins that resemble elephant ears or the wings of a moth. The horror, or the wonder, depending on your threshold for the unknown, lies in its arms. Most squid have 8 arms and 2 longer feeding tentacles, usually kept tucked away or curled gracefully until they strike. Magna pinna breaks this rule. It possesses 10 identical appendages, indistinguishable from one another, and they are incredibly long, stretching down into the darkness for 4, maybe 8 meters. They are thin as wire, white as bone, and they do not drift organically in the current. Instead, they hang straight down from the body, rigid and vertical, and then, abruptly, they bend. Every single arm is held out at a perfect 90-degree angle, creating distinct elbows before dropping vertically again. This geometry is what disturbs us. In nature, we are accustomed to curves, spirals, and fluid motion. We are not used to right angles. Seeing a creature with elbows hanging in the abyss looks artificial. It looks like a marionette puppet with its strings cut, or a stick figure drawn by a frightened child. The squid hovers in the water column, absolutely motionless, with its tentacles draped below it like a curtain of long white fingers. It doesn't seem to swim so much as haunt the current, drifting with a ghostly, unsettling elegance. Scientific understanding of Magna pinna is frustratingly scarce. We have never captured a live specimen. We have never found a dead body in good condition. Everything we know comes from these chance encounters with industrial cameras. We suspect that the elbow posture is a feeding strategy. By spreading its arms wide and letting the sticky, microscopic extensions of its tentacles drag through the water or along the seafloor, it creates a massive sensory net. Essentially trawling for food, waiting for a small shrimp or zooplankton to bump into one of those wire-thin lines. A passive hunter, a sentinel that turns the ocean around it into a trap. The silence surrounding this creature is its most defining trait. We have never seen one eat. We have never seen one mate. We do not know how they reproduce, how fast they grow, or how long they live. We have only seen them staring back at our cameras, suspended in the silence, watching the noisy lighted robots of humanity invade their living room. They are a reminder that even in the 21st century, the ocean is capable of producing monsters that we cannot explain, creatures that look like extraterrestrials hiding in our own basement. The big fin squid fades back into the shadows above us, continuing our descent, approaching a significant boundary. The abyssal plains are falling away, dropping off into steep, jagged canyons that cut deep into the crust of the planet. The pressure outside is reaching levels that destroy not just bones, but the fundamental chemistry of life. Leaving the abyss behind and entering the Hadal zone, the trenches. 6,000 meters, leaving the vast, flat, abyssal plains behind. The geology outside our window has undergone a violent transformation. The sediment is no longer a flat prairie, but a steep, jagged slope plunging downward into the crust of the earth. The Hadal zone, named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld. These are the trenches, the Mariana, the Tonga, the Kermadec, deep tectonic scars formed where one plate is being forced beneath another. Here, the pressure exceeds 800 atmospheres, a weight so immense that it feels less like water and more like a solid, crushing vice. You might expect such a hostile environment to be devoid of complex life, a dead zone where biology simply gives up. Look closely at the footage captured by a robotic lander in the Izu Ogasawara Trench at a depth of exactly 8,336 meters, a record confirmed as recently as 2023, and you will see something that seems to defy the laws of physics. Not a monster, not an armored tank built to withstand the crush. A small, pale, tadpole-like creature moving with a gentle, fluttering grace. The Hadal snailfish, Pseudoliparis. Its skin is translucent and gelatinous, so thin that you can see its liver through its side. It has no scales, no sharp spines, and looks as fragile as a piece of wet tissue paper. Yet, this delicate animal is the undisputed mountaineer of the deep, living at the absolute deepest point any vertebrate has ever been found. The existence of the snailfish at these depths is a masterpiece of biochemical engineering, but it is also a story about limits. To survive the pressure that would crush a titanium submarine, the snailfish packs its cells with trimethylamine N oxide, TMAO, the pressure-fighting molecule we discussed earlier. TMAO acts as a structural pillar, stopping proteins from collapsing. The rule of the deep is simple. The deeper you go, the more TMAO you need to keep your cells functioning. This chemical solution, however, comes with a mathematical deadline. TMAO doesn't just fight pressure, it also interacts with water. It increases the concentration of solutes inside the fish's body, making its internal fluids saltier. In the ocean, there is a constant war between the water outside a fish and the fluids inside it, governed by a force called osmosis. Water naturally wants to flow from where it is fresh to where it is salty. Marine fish have to work hard to keep their internal chemistry balanced with the seawater outside. As the snailfish goes deeper, pumping more and more TMAO into its cells to fight the mounting pressure, its internal fluids become saltier and saltier. Biochemists have calculated that at a depth of approximately 8,400 meters, this balance hits a hard, insurmountable wall. At this specific depth, the concentration of TMAO required to counteract the pressure would make the fish's cells just as salty as the ocean itself, a state called isosmotic. If a fish tried to go just a few meters deeper, it would need even more TMAO. This would make its cells saltier than the seawater. The result would be catastrophic. The ocean would rush into the fish's body in an uncontrollable flood to balance the salinity, causing its cells to swell and rupture, or the chemical toxicity of the TMAO itself would shut down its nervous system. The biochemical wall, an invisible barrier drawn in the water by the laws of thermodynamics. The snailfish we see at 8,336 meters are not just lucky, they are living on the razor's edge of what is chemically possible. They are standing at the summit of their own Mount Everest, gasping in the thin air, unable to take one more step upward. Except here, they are at the bottom, unable to go 1 meter deeper. So, when we look into the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, which plunges down to nearly 11,000 meters, we do not see fish. The snailfish are gone. They have hit the ceiling of vertebrate evolution. The darkness below 8,400 meters is a no-fish zone. The ocean does not end there. There are still nearly 3 kilometers of depth remaining before we hit the absolute bottom. If the complexity of a fish, with its brain, its heart and its nervous system, cannot survive the chemistry of the trenches, then what can? To survive in the true bottom of the world, life must abandon complexity. It must revert to something ancient. The bottom. The depth gauge reads 10,935 meters. The Challenger Deep, the lowest point in the Mariana Trench, and effectively the basement of the planet. If you were to step out onto the sediment here, the column of water above your head would exert a pressure of over 1,000 atmospheres, roughly equivalent to a person trying to hold up 50 jumbo jets. At this depth, the physics of biology has stripped away almost everything we recognize as life. There are no snailfish here. They were stopped kilometers above us by the limits of their own chemistry. There are no crabs, no sharks, no squid. So, looking out the reinforced quartz window at the endless flat expanse of grey silt, you might be tempted to call this place a desert. You might assume that the combination of freezing temperatures, total darkness, and crushing weight has sterilized the environment completely. Look closer at the mud. Scattered across the bottom, nestled in the fine sediment like debris from a shipwreck, are strange, lumpy shapes. Some are small, like a fist. Others are as large as a grapefruit or even a dinner plate. They look like discarded sponges, or perhaps crumbled balls of aluminum foil that have been dropped from a boat. Not rocks. Alive. Xenophyophores. Without a doubt, the most alien creatures on Earth. The detail that makes them impossible to comprehend is not their shape, but their biological definition. Each of these lumps, some measuring 20 centimeters across, is a single cell. Pause and consider the absurdity of that statement. In the biological world, we know a cell is microscopic, a building block, a tiny brick in the wall of a larger organism. You need a microscope just to see one. Your own body is composed of approximately 30 trillion cells working in concert. Down here, in the crushing dark, life has decided that teamwork is too expensive. Complexity is a liability. Maintaining a heart, a brain, or a nervous system requires too much energy. So the Xenophyophores have remained singular. They are amoebas that have grown to the size of a human head. They are delicate, giant bags of cytoplasm containing thousands of nuclei floating freely, but enclosed within a single, continuous outer membrane, the giants of the void. Their name, Xenophyophore, comes from the Greek meaning bearer of foreign bodies, and it tells you exactly how they survive. These single-celled giants are the ultimate hoarders. Lacking a hard skeleton of their own, they crawl almost imperceptibly through the mud, picking up tiny grains of sand, sharp shell fragments, and volcanic dust. They secrete a sticky organic glue to bind these particles together, building a fragile, intricate shell, called a test, that protects their soft, gelatinous bodies from the currents and predators. They are architects who build their own bones out of the ocean's trash. Their diet is even stranger than their architecture. The sediment in the Hadal trenches is not just mud, it is a sink for toxins. Heavy metals and pollutants that enter the ocean eventually sink to the bottom, accumulating in the trenches like dust in a gutter. The Xenophyophores don't just tolerate this toxicity, they seem to thrive on it. Scientists analyzing these creatures have found that their bodies contain incredibly high concentrations of lead, uranium, and mercury, levels that would kill almost any other animal instantly. They are naturally radioactive, they are highly toxic, living hazardous waste filters, sitting silently in the dark, sifting through the mud to extract bacteria and organic particles, absorbing the poisons of the planet as a side effect. And because they are so toxic, very few things can eat them. They sit undisturbed, sometimes for decades, growing slowly in the silence. Something deeply humbling about their presence. Xenophyophores are ancient. Their lineage goes back hundreds of millions of years. They were sitting in this mud when the dinosaurs rose and fell, watching from a distance of 11 kilometers. They felt the vibrations of the meteor that killed the Cretaceous world. They waited through the ice ages, silent witnesses of Earth, unchanging and unbothered. The perfect organism for a world where nothing else can survive. Proof that life does not need to be smart, fast, or complex to win the game of evolution. Sometimes it just needs to be tough. These radioactive hermits are not the only secret the bottom of the world is hiding. For centuries we believed that all life on Earth, including the Xenophyophores, was ultimately dependent on the sun. We thought that oxygen could only be produced by plants and algae through photosynthesis. We believed the deep ocean was just a consumer, breathing the oxygen that sank from the surface. In July 2024, a team of scientists working in the deep Pacific discovered that the textbooks were wrong. They found something on the seafloor that was breathing, but it wasn't alive. For as long as humans have studied biology, we have accepted a fundamental truth that serves as the bedrock of our understanding of life. Oxygen comes from the sun. We learn it in grade school. Plants, algae, and cyanobacteria use the energy of sunlight to strip carbon dioxide and release oxygen. Photosynthesis, the engine of our atmosphere. Logic dictates that in the deep ocean, where there is no sun, there can be no oxygen production. The animals living in the abyss, from the vampire squid to the snailfish, survive only by breathing the oxygen that slowly sinks from the surface currents. The deep ocean is a consumer, not a producer, a metabolic sink. In July 2024, a team of scientists conducting research in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, a vast stretch of the Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and Mexico, discovered that the textbooks were wrong. They had sent landers down to the abyssal plain 4,000 meters deep to measure oxygen consumption at the seafloor. They expected the numbers to slowly drop as the bacteria and deep-sea fauna consumed the available air. Instead, the sensors reported something impossible. The oxygen levels were going up. At first, the researchers assumed their equipment was broken. In science, when you see a result that violates the laws of nature, you blame the sensor, not nature. They recalibrated. They used different methods. They sent new sensors down. The result was consistent. In total darkness, 4 kilometers beneath the waves, massive amounts of fresh oxygen were being generated. The ocean floor was breathing. The source of this dark oxygen was not a plant, not a hidden colony of algae. The rocks. Scattered across the sediment of the abyss like spilled marbles are millions of black, potato-sized lumps called polymetallic nodules, geological oddities. They take millions of years to form, growing layer by layer around a nucleus, like a shark tooth or a fragment of shell, precipitating metals directly from the seawater. They are incredibly rich in manganese, nickel, copper, and cobalt. For decades, we looked at them simply as mineral deposits, static lumps of metal sitting in the mud. The 2024 study revealed that they are electrically active. The unique layering of different metals inside these nodules creates a difference in potential. They are, effectively, natural geobatteries. When the researchers stuck probes into the surface of a single nodule, they measured a voltage of up to 0.95 volts. That might sound small. A AA battery is 1.5 volts, but these nodules do not sit alone. They are clustered together by the billions, touching one another, connected by the conductive seawater. When they sit in dense patches, they can act like batteries wired in series, boosting the electrical charge significantly. When the voltage on the surface of these rocks reaches roughly 1.5 volts, it triggers a chemical process known as seawater electrolysis. The electricity physically rips the water molecules apart. It splits the H2O, separating the hydrogen from the oxygen. The oxygen is then released into the water, creating a localized bubble of life-sustaining air in the middle of a dead zone. This discovery changes everything we thought we knew about the origins of life. Until now, we believed that complex life on Earth could only begin after cyanobacteria started pumping oxygen into the atmosphere via photosynthesis. If the seafloor has been generating its own dark oxygen for billions of years via geology, then the first aerobic life forms might have evolved in the deep long before the sun became a factor. The Goldilocks zone for life is much wider than we thought. If oxygen can be made by rocks in the dark, then the subsurface oceans of Jupiter's moon, Europa, or Saturn's moon, Enceladus, places locked under kilometers of ice, might have oxygenated waters capable of supporting complex, breathing animals, fueled entirely by the electric rocks on their floors. The abyss is not a suffocating cellar, it is an electric garden. This revelation comes with a bitter irony. The very nodules that are producing this oxygen, sustaining the xenophyophores and the ghosts of the deep, are the exact same rocks that humanity is desperate to harvest. These polymetallic nodules are packed with the cobalt and nickel required to build the lithium-ion batteries for our electric cars and smartphones. We call it the green transition. To save the atmosphere above, we are preparing to send massive robotic harvesters down to strip mine the ocean floor, standing on the precipice of an ecological tragedy. Just as we discover that the seafloor is a living, breathing lung that might have birthed life itself, we are finalizing plans to vacuum it up. We are preparing to destroy the alien Earth before we have even finished mapping it. This realization brings a heavy, melancholic tone to the end of our journey. We came here looking for monsters. We came here looking for the alien, the strange, and the frightening. Looking at the plastic bag resting next to the electric rock and the scars of test mining tracks cutting through the sediment, we realize that the most destructive force in the deep is not the pressure, nor the cold, nor the hunger. It is us. The end of the line. The depth gauge reads 10,928 meters, hovering just above the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point on the Earth's crust. A place of solitude so profound that fewer human beings have visited this spot than have walked on the surface of the moon. We are further away from the sunlit world than a commercial airliner cruising at altitude is from the ground. In this freezing, crushing silence, we expect to find a pristine wilderness, a place untouched by the chaotic hand of civilization. In 2019, when the explorer Victor Vescovo piloted his titanium submersible, the limiting factor, to this exact spot to break the world record for the deepest solo dive, he looked out the viewport and saw something that shattered the illusion of isolation. Sitting half buried in the ancient grey silt, drifting gently in the weak current caused by the thrusters, was not a sea monster, not an alien structure, a plastic grocery bag. Think about the sheer statistical improbability of that object. That bag was likely manufactured in a factory in Asia or North America, used for 20 minutes to carry groceries, discarded, and then travelled thousands of kilometres, sinking through layer after layer of the ocean, dodging sharks, whales, and currents, to land at the absolute mathematical bottom of the world. It arrived before we did. This discovery illustrates a terrifying principle of the ocean's geography, the gravity funnel. We tend to treat the ocean as a bottomless pit, believing that when we throw something away, it vanishes. There is no away. The continental shelves slope down to the abyssal plains, and the abyssal plains slope down into the trenches. Gravity pulls everything, every discarded net, every bottle cap, every microplastic fibre, downward into these V-shaped scars in the crust. The trenches are the ultimate drain of the planet. Once plastic lands here, it never leaves. In the freezing, sunless dark, there is no UV radiation to break down the polymers. That bag could sit there for 1,000 years, a synthetic fossil of our species. The visible trash is just the tip of the iceberg. The real horror is microscopic. Scientists have begun sampling the amphipods, the tiny shrimp-like scavengers that live in these trenches. When they dissected them, they found plastic fibers woven into their digestive tracts. In fact, a new species discovered in the Mariana Trench was found to be so contaminated with polyethylene terephthalate, PT, that researchers officially named it Erythanes plasticus. We have written our signature into the very DNA of the deepest life on Earth. We have managed to pollute the blood of creatures that will never see the sun. With this sobering realization, it is time to leave. We drop our ballast weights, steel plates that fall into the mud, leaving one final footprint, and the submersible begins to rise. The journey back to the surface is a slow, deliberate unwinding of the journey down. We cannot rush it. Although we are inside a pressurized hull, the ascent feels psychological as much as physical. We watch the depth gauge scroll backward through history. We leave the toxic xenophyophores and the dark oxygen nodules behind. We rise past the biochemical wall at 8,400 meters, where the snailfish dance on the edge of death. We drift up through the abyssal plains, leaving the stationary tripod fish in their eternal wait. We pass the midnight zone, bidding farewell to the desperate hunger of the gulper eel and the fused romance of the anglerfish. And as we cross the 500-meter mark, the blue lie begins to reassert itself. Watch the window. For hours, your eyes have adjusted to absolute suffocating blackness. Now, the chemistry of the water is reversing the theft it committed on the way down. First, the black softens into a deep, heavy indigo, the color of a bruised sky. Then, as the sun's photons begin to batter the water molecules once again, the indigo shifts into a rich, royal blue. We are re-entering the world of light. Breaching the surface, the hatch opens, and the sensory overload hits you. The smell of salt and iodine, the roar of the waves, the blinding, unshielded power of the sun. It feels like waking up from a heavy, vivid dream. Looking out at the flat, glittering horizon, you realize that you can never look at the ocean the same way again. You now know that the blue marble is a mask. You know that the true reality of Earth is not the sunlit surface where we live. The true Earth is dark, cold, and crushing. The norm for this planet is the blackness of the midnight zone. We, the air-breathing, sun-loving apes clinging to the dry rocks, are the strange ones. We are the fragile exceptions living in the attic of a very dark house. This brings us to the final answer regarding our fear. Why do we suffer from thalassophobia? Why do creatures like the big-fin squid or the anglerfish trigger such a deep, visceral revulsion in us, a feeling of wrongness that psychologists call the uncanny valley? Because they look like glitches in the simulation. We evolved on the savannah, in a world of gravity, trees, and horizon lines. We understand a world where things have legs and faces. The deep ocean is a world of three-dimensional suspension, a place without up or down, without day or night. The creatures there have been sculpted by a physics we do not face. They have dissolved their bones, inflated their mouths, and fused their bodies. They are not monsters. They are biological solutions to problems we cannot comprehend. We fear them because they remind us that we are not the protagonists of this planet. They have been here for hundreds of millions of years before us, and they will be here long after we and our plastic are gone. The ocean is sleeping. The giants are waiting in the dark, and we are just visitors floating on the surface of their world.